the CEO or the CFO. It was very,
Hmm.
very rare that you had a CTO on the board. And there's still that culture in a lot of companies. We did a survey recently of the community that we have, and we asked them how many of their companies had a CTO on the board, and it was just 40%, which is astonishing when you think that almost every
Yeah,
company now is a tech company.
yeah,
So it is about communicating very technical, complex ideas and reports
yeah,
through to often very non-technical people. Um, so communication, empathy, all of these things that are about bringing people with you. I have a saying that I raise all the time. It says that he who thinks he leads, but is not being followed, is just taking a walk.
Today's guest is Andrew Weaver, co founder and CEO of CTO Academy, an educational product that works with thousands of CTOs today. With Andrew, we talked about the CTO journey, why the CTO role is different from anything else, and what makes for a great CTO. We also discussed the future of education for tech leaders, the importance of being intentional about personal and professional growth, and lessons learned by running a large educational platform for extremely technical and busy people. Hey, Andrew, welcome. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
Luca, it's a great pleasure and privilege, and as you know, I'm normally not the only non-techie in the room, but I feel particularly the only non-techie in the room when I look at your stellar list of guests on the podcast. So it's a great privilege to be on it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And first of all, let me tell you that I'm so happy to have you today. You're the very first guest that I've met in real life. So, so we met in Rome. I checked my notes. It was in May last year. We had lovely chats. I'm happy to continue today on the podcast.
Yeah. Well, what the audience don't know, and of course I have joked with Luca before, is I've been a great fan of Roman history for many many years, most of my life. Never been to Rome, and so I landed in Rome, and Luca took me to the worst pizza restaurant that Rome could possibly ever. I mean, I can't imagine it could be any worse.
I know, and I'm still ashamed to this day about this, and I know you will remind me for the rest of my life. So
Indeed.
we
Well,
had we had obligatory
until you
to
take
start the podcast like
until you
this.
take me to a better pizza restaurant, I will remind you about it, Luca.
Deal.
Yeah,
That's perfect deal.
yeah.
So let's dive right into it. One reason why I'm so happy to talk with you is that you run CTO Academy, of course. You're the CEO and co-founder, which is a very successful product for CTOs. At a time where investing in personal and professional growth is so important, but it's also so hard for many out there because we have little time, we don't know how to do that. So my very first question is very basic to set possibly the right context. That is, what is CTO Academy and how does it work?
Well, let's thank you for the question and thank you for the introduction. I mean, perhaps as well, it would be nice for the audience just so context of how I arrived into it as well, being
Sure,
slightly odd to
sure.
have somebody who's non-technical leading a company that's
Yeah.
helping technical people. So very very briefly, my backstory: I'm from England. I was involved in family businesses. I then did an MBA. Was involved actually in very non-technical organization, quite traditional businesses, and then decided to get into startups very late in my life, much to the annoyance of my wife. Certainly hit the income for a few years. But why the reason I mentioned that is it was the first time I worked directly and commercially with very technical people. And there were a couple of startups, one I invested in and one of mine, where I had a brilliant tech founder involved in it who really struggled with getting out of the weeds of the business, really struggled with the more commercial or the leadership or the soft skills, which we'll come to, I'm sure, shortly. So I saw the impact that it had on them as individuals and the restrictions it had on their impact. And also, of course, it impacted on the stakeholders. So when I met my now co-founder Jason, who is a CTO of many many years, and he raised this, he only had a brand name at the time, Luca. He said, "I've got an idea called CTO Academy," and there was nothing else to it at the time. And he mentioned that it was about him responding to his own challenges when he'd been coming up through his career where he really hadn't had any guidance at all. He was learning everything himself on the job in silos, and it meant that he, on reflection, had made an awful lot of mistakes that had, in Jason's words, he thinks held back his career by 5 or 10 years, and the ability to have an impact.
Mm,
So he'd
mm,
experienced this at the front line, had come up with this idea, this rough idea of could I do something that I would have liked to have had when I was in my career, or as in Jason would have liked to have had. And when he mentioned it, and I'd had these two experiences in the startup world of people who'd had the same, we just thought there was something really interesting in there. So we sat at a cafe by the River Thames in London, probably about 5 years ago when we had that conversation. And it's kind of organically grown since then. So we didn't quite know what it was going to look like, or what we wanted to achieve with
yeah,
it. We thought at the early stage, Luca, to be honest, it was for quite junior managers. So we thought that maybe people just starting out on their career. So we launched a very tiny little course. We put some AdWords behind it in 2019 that was aimed for that kind of junior manager, and it just kind of built from there really. And we very quickly got people recognizing what we were trying to do at very senior levels. And when
yeah,
we had the global or the group CTO of Decathlon, I forget what his exact role was, but very senior guy at Decathlon, I think contacted us within 3 weeks of launching. He'd stumbled across us
wow,
and saying that he wished he'd had it in his career journey. So we realized that we were onto something, and it's kind of just evolved from there. So we added coaching, which was fine, but commercially wasn't really a good model for us. Then we had group coaching, a few other things, and probably about 2.5 years ago, we launched which our main product, which is the digital MBA for technology leaders, directly as an alternative to those very big ticket programs that I'm sure many people are familiar with
yeah.
at Wharton and Berkeley. And so that's our core product, but around that we do have membership package and community. But the idea is to help very technical people with that transition into the more hybrid skill set that you need to be really effective in a senior role.
Yeah, that's so interesting, and I love that you mentioned hybrid skill set because sometimes we say that the role of a CTO is so hard to define, because it depends on your company, depends on the stage of your product, on so many things. And by the way, your story resonates so much with me because that's basically how I started the newsletter, how I started refactoring, because I looked back at my experience as a young CTO of VC-backed startup. It was my very first job. I didn't know how to do anything, and so I had to learn everything by myself, just like Jason. And so I just thought of starting writing things that I would have loved to read when I was younger. But I digress anyway. So the first question that comes to my mind, and I thought about it while you were speaking, is you said that you try to adjust, to figure out what works and what was really the right way of making CTOs grow personally and professionally. And now you have thousands of them, like in the community who have run the course. So were you able to draw a picture of what makes a great CTO? Like I know it's a broad question. I mean, it's basically impossible to answer. But have you found some common traits, and then we may, go from there into more specific angles?
Well, you've alluded to it in that intro, really, that it is impossible to pigeonhole the CTO. The CTO
Yeah,
at a startup, the CTO at an enterprise level are totally different jobs. We actually have and you probably recognize this phrase. We have a phrase called the accidental CTO, which we always
yeah,
we say it's the most senior software engineer in a fast growth company where they've just given him or her the hat. And that individual is just rabbit in the headlights. That is firefighting all the time, whereas the enterprise CTO is probably dealing with politics and posturing most of the time. So
mm,
totally different roles, absolutely. But there are definitely generic traits. There are definitely core traits behind what we see as successful CTOs and what we hear from others that have been successful. And we have this phrase: "It's rarely about the tech." And
yeah. It's
uh,
the
it's the
title
title. I
of
know
this
it is, and thank you
conversation.
for picking up on that. And there's a couple of things behind that idea. So on the digital MBA, just as a quick example, it's 220 micro lectures, I think. Sometimes changes a bit, but the very first lecture is that. The very first lecture
Mm,
is to establish right at the beginning, if you're looking at what a CTO is expected to do, or what are the expectations from the C-suite? It's rarely about the tech. Okay. Now, clearly, you've got to have an interest. You've got to have an aptitude for the tech. You've got to be aware of the new technologies and how they might be used within the company, and also, of course, potentially as a threat. And I'll come back to that later. I know you want to talk about AI and how that's impacting on CTOs. So clearly, you have to have those things, but they're a given. if you're going to be a truly successful CTO, senior leader, that they're a given. But the challenge for CTOs, and I think it really is a unique challenge for those that are trying to get there, is that the skills that got you to a certain level are not the skills that are
Yeah.
going to make you truly successful at the senior role. And that's unique, in my view. If you look at the rest of the C suite, most of the things that we did, most of the things I've done in my career have been building up towards me reaching a CEO or a founder role. Okay. There hasn't
Yeah.
been a big shift of skills for me. It's mainly down to experience, really. The same for the CFO, same for the CMO. For the CTO, it's like a handbrake turn, and it's
Hmm.
because it's such a significant shift, a transition of skills. That's why people find it so challenging, and it's partly why we exist and why you exist. It's because people do need the support, because it is a dramatic shift. So what sets apart great CTOs from the rest? It is definitely, in our opinion, it's people skills. The challenges are mostly
Hmm.
not tech that we have access to today. I mean, even you'll know this, Luca. I mean, even 10 years ago, the SaaS platforms that are out there are much better than 10 or 15
Yeah.
years ago. So the challenge as a senior technology leader is definitely now the people side, managing teams, helping them adapt, to new capabilities and skills, having judgment calls on those that can make that journey, or those that can't, which again is an enormous skill. And I often think that soft skills, which is what we call it, is a complete misnomer, because actually I think for
Yeah.
for many technologists, it is actually the hard skills that they're having to adapt. So that's the kind of helicopter view of what we see as being crucial to being effective.
Yeah, so from your point of view, this is where CTOs struggle the most. So what you're saying is that you grow your career by growing your tech skills, by having more impact on the technology side, but then you get to a point where you get into a leadership position, CTO or VP of engineering, things like that. Talking of CTOs here, where what really makes the difference is not your tech chops anymore, but it's what we shouldn't call soft skills, right? It's about managing and empowering people. So that's the handbrake. That's the turn in your career.
Yeah, indeed, and it is definitely the wrong phrase, because so it's about people skills, and of course, it's also broader than that. It's about communication. It's about beginning to speak the language of the business. You have to become the advocate for the tech on a board, for
Yeah,
example. Now, they might not
yeah,
all be technical people. Not everybody has come from a digital background. And the other challenge, I think, Luca, that we see still is that tech always traditionally was viewed as a cost center. So the CEO or the CFO, it's
hmm,
very, very rare that you had a CTO on the board. And there's still that culture in a lot of companies. We did a survey recently of the community that we have, and we asked them how many of their companies had a CTO on the board, and it was just 40%, which is astonishing when you think that almost every
yeah,
company now is a tech company.
yeah,
So it is about communicating very technical, complex ideas and reports
yeah,
through to often very non-technical people. Um, so communication, empathy, all of these things that are about bringing people with you. I have a saying that I raise all the time. It says that he who thinks he leads, but is not being followed, is just taking a walk. It is about bringing people with you,
yeah.
and that's challenging.
Yeah, I agree. That's a very recurring pain. I'm also thinking of people in the audience of refactoring, speaking in the community, writing emails about technical people not being able to get their points across in conversations, advocating for technology work. And you see this, of course, at every levels. I mean, from software engineers negotiating with their managers
Mm.
up to, of course, as you mentioned, CTOs in boards or not in boards, but even they should be there. So how do you grow like that? I mean, how do you develop those skills in your opinion? Is that something you just naturally develop on the job, or you can invest intentionally in growing them throughout in other ways?
Yes, I think you know, there are certain reasons why people join CTO Academy, Luca, and one of them that comes up a lot is they want to address the unknown unknowns. And again, I
Hmm.
think that the challenge is that often people who are ambitious and aspiring to get to senior leadership roles are not always 100% sure of what it is that they're having to change or they're having to think about. So there's a great mindset shift. The most, perhaps the most obvious one is you've got to stop having hands on the keyboard. You've got to get out of the code,
Yeah.
get out of the weeds of the product. And one of the challenges I think as well is that there are lots of areas when you're in a senior leadership role. I'm sure you had this, Luca. You just don't have the time to go into the detail as you might have historically wanted to and been able to. You don't have 3 weeks to go into something in the finest of details, and that is frustrating for someone who instinctively wants to do that. So you have to
Yeah.
learn those skills of certainly, of course, delegation, which comes up a lot, and just making decisions with a limited amount of information. So it's that way of thinking. It's that shift of mindset that I think is often one of the biggest challenges.
Yeah. And is it that what makes people uncomfortable even to um, realizing what value they're bringing to the table? I think because many tech people are used to think about their value as the output they produce,
Yep.
the code that they write, the solutions that they create. While at some point, when you become a manager of managers, a CTO of a larger scale company, your output maybe is just the output of your team, and that kicks in a lot of imposter syndrome. So I don't know if you're seeing that. I mean, people who aren't sure about what value they're really bringing.
We,
I felt that as a CTO. I'm asking because I felt
No,
that
I
many
know, I
times.
know. And well, listen, we all have imposter syndrome. So I always say very early when I hear someone raise that and say, look, you are not alone. In fact, you're amongst friends if you're suffering from the imposter syndrome. But I think it is big. I think it is a harsher reality for people who are coming from a technical background. And there are a lot of statistics about mental health issues around, the challenges that technical people and senior technical people have around these kind of confidence issues. So that's definitely an issue and a concern. But and I think that's why communities like yours and ours are so important. The ability to be able to share within a safe space some of those challenges and some of those feelings of insecurity that are bound to happen, particularly as you grow into your senior roles. And the expectation on you as you move into those senior roles, it does change. You're not being paid to do the code. You're not being paid to be in the weeds. You are being paid to be strategic. You are being paid to add that extra value. So, if the expectations on you and what they're paying you for shifts as well as everything else. And so I think the ability to lean into a community, the ability to share those challenges and those concerns are super important as part of that personal growth program.
Yeah. Have you found that the skills, both people skills and more hard skills that are needed, are needed of you as a CTO, change based on the scale of your company? I mean, do
Yeah,
you
for sure.
think that small or mid-scale startup CTOs need a different kind of support and skill set than people in larger organizations?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to the original point we were saying about, the
Yeah.
job specification is so different. I mean, there's a reality with small teams. I mean, I was talking, in fact, the call I had just before this was with a CTO in a team that was only five of them. So clearly he's
Yeah.
he's still super hands-on but he's
Yeah.
firefighting because he's having to manage that limited resource, and there are only so many people that he can bring in. So, the resource that's available to you will dictate to some extent what you can and can't do, and what the expectations are on you around what you can and can't do. But certainly, as the business gets bigger, you have to move further and further away from that day-to-day keyboard activity, and you have to be seen to be bringing in people that, you know, I mean, I go back to the point about, one of the things I think that is crucial for people is the ability to build teams, to spot talent, and to give them the
Mm.
license and the freedom to grow. And that, again, sometimes goes against the grain. You might want to step in, but you've got to have that ability to spot them, spot the talented people, and give them the access and the autonomy to grow into those roles. And that, as you're moving, certainly as you're moving in a fast growth company, that's one of those growth challenges that you definitely have to face. And as I say, if you move into a larger organization, you're almost not touching any of the tech at all. Most of your time is taken up on politics and posturing and looking at the
Yeah.
future, for sure.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. I mean, it's growing path, uh, and you know how they say, what got you here won't get you there, and it's right even when it comes to the scale of the companies. And you mentioned community and support and building a rapport with your peers and other CTOs. And what I'm hearing even through the community in the newsletter is that this is an area that, for example, the shift to remote work made harder because many or I don't know in your community, but in refactoring community, many people are working on full remote teams. And one of the areas where um, full remote teams kind of fall short is in developing this kind of relationships and bonding that are also useful to diffuse stress, and to
Mhm.
live better at work. So is this something that you're seeing on your side, or have you seen some of the skills and the aspects of the work of a CTO change slightly with the shift to remote work?
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, there's a reality in terms of our timeline, Luca, in that we basically started as the pandemic happened. So
Yeah.
we've all of our people, as I'm sure the same with you, have pretty much just had to adapt to remote working. And again, I think for technical people, if I may say this, if I may be so bold as to suggest this, that not all of them are, most of them are introverts, or a large majority of them are introverts. And I think what I do notice a lot with management of remote teams is, there is sometimes an avoidance of what I would call the small talk. And I think it's so
Mm,
important. It's so important, particularly in remote teams where you don't get that water cooler moment, if we can call it that. You don't get this
yeah.
opportunities to bump into each other, that you allow yourself some room to just talk about life. Yeah. We
Yeah.
open up all of our stand-ups with social stuff always. What did you do at the weekend? All this kind of stuff. And I can see, Jason, my co-founder, he is cut from traditional cloth, right? He is an introvert guy who doesn't really have any time for small talk. I've had to train him to over communicate, to understand that the soft discussions are actually important. That people feel that they're part of the team, they feel that they're being listened to, they feel that their personal life is important to you as well as the professional. And I think that really has become a massive thing within managing a remote team, that in a way that perhaps we hadn't appreciated.
Yeah, I love how with your answer you blended basically both your experience with other CTOs and your experience at CTO Academy itself. I mean, how you are doing it yourself. So uh, basically, what you're saying is that you have to be intentional
Yes.
about creating these moments, about embedding them into your ceremonies, into your meetings. Otherwise, this kind of bonding, this kind of small talk, just doesn't happen by itself.
Indeed. I mean, just a slight anecdote in my journey, Luca. With I'm an extrovert in the sense that I struggle with silences. So if there's a silence, I feel I have to fill it and all this kind of stuff. And so I came into this arena of dealing with people who are generally, the largest percentage of them are introverts by nature. We actually, one of our lectures that I deliver in the course is about, I call it unleashing the quiet genius, because I actually believe that the people who can combine technology with business skills can take over the world. But anyway, the point of this was, on some of my first sessions, I would sit on the Zoom calls and I would just find it really difficult to engage, because it was purely work. I found it really
Yeah,
difficult to get any reaction. And I'd say to Jason afterwards, I said, that was a disaster. And he said, no, it was great. It was great. But it was indicative to me that, people aren't instinctively going to come forward. Yeah. And in this
yeah.
community, and say anything that's personal or social. So you do, intentional is a great word. You do have to be intentional in making sure that they feel they can come forward and talk about that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it matches my experience as well. But now you got me curious. How do you unleash the quiet genius? I mean, how do you take this introversion to your advantage to as a superpower?
Well, I think certainly it's about psychological safety. It's about making sure that all voices
Mm,
are heard. It's about making sure that the superstar developer doesn't dominate everything. It is, about understanding what motivates those that are different to you. One of the things, there's lots of these type of things around, but there's something that we use called 16 personalities, which just kind of
mm,
defines a little bit about what your personality is. So when we get new hires, we always ask them to do it without being too intrusive, just to get a sense of what it is that is motivating them. So, I think if you give introverted people the confidence and the platform and that sense that they do belong, that freedom, then they're going to be incredibly powerful for your organization. But it's making sure, again, it goes back to your phrase of intentional, Luca. If you're managing a team, it's very easy to go to the noisiest people every time. So I'll give you a quick example. We do we do
yeah,
we do some live sessions. We have live sessions every week in different forms, and we try and get different members of the community to host different aspects of the breakouts, it's really easy for me to go straight to the person I know is going to be comfortable doing it, the extrovert, the person who's always puts his hand up. I actually make myself, and I think through it in advance to make sure that I don't do that, that I pick out the people who are perhaps not going to put themselves forward. So that's one tiny example where just making it an even playing field for the extrovert and the introvert, I think, brings that forward.
Yeah, I think that's a great take, and I love that you mentioned psychological safety. So basically, what you're saying is that even if someone is quiet, you can probably find ways to let him engage more. That probably speak more to his way of feeling safe on or his preferred way of interacting, and you can try to design the way your team exchanges feedback and communication to let people who are less, naturally uh, extroverted participate through their own ways.
I think so, and I think this works as well in terms of the challenge of the gender imbalance as well. It's a slight tangential
Mm,
point, but again, the percentages in our community are the same, frustratingly the same low
yeah,
percentages that there are in tech in general. So you'll get a
yeah,
breakout room with perhaps one female and six males. So again,
yeah.
just making sure that there isn't that sense of isolation. Being the only female in the room, for example, I think again is a similar perspective.
Yeah, yeah. But have you, anyway, this is a tangent on a tangent, but have you seen this getting better, this imbalance between genders? This is something that, anyway, it happens even in the refactoring community.
Mhm.
We try to do something about it, but it feels like maybe it's slightly getting better with time. I don't know if you have noticed that.
Well, coming into tech quite late, I was astonished the imbalance, and it's
Yeah,
and the data is not just anecdotal. The data is very very clear that there is definitely gender bias, stereotyping going on, unequal pay. It is we are definitely got a tangent here, but I'm particularly keen on this topic because I was very alarmed. I was surprised by some of the justifications that went on as to why this was
yeah,
happening. Yeah, so I mean we have a couple of initiatives where we are trying to do it, but it's tough. It's incremental change. But I think if we're all thinking about it and applying it, then hopefully, pretty quickly it will change. But I've not seen anything dramatic, Luca, in the 4 years now.
yeah. I think it's very true that if you come from another space, like the business background, you don't come from tech, that you immediately see
Mm,
that. I think one of the problems is that people who have been in tech their whole life, like myself, for example, have seen this kind of imbalance forever, like from university, for example. And so at some point, it kind of feels normal,
mm,
while it shouldn't.
mm.
And so the risk is that you get numb and
Mm.
you stop thinking about that when instead you always should anyway. So you knew instead, I mean, changing topic and getting back from the tangent of the tangent of the tangent. We have a few obligatory questions on podcast episodes. One is on remote work, another is on AI, of course, and you know it was coming. So I always ask about guests on the show. First, I mean, how if AI is changing anyhow their own workflows or their companies, the way you're doing things. And second, I mean, speaking with you who are working with so many CTOs, how you're seeing AI changing the work, the skills, the expectations of people in your community.
Yes, I think every single live session that we've had since ChatGPT arrived has had AI in it, and I think I
Yeah.
think some of the most obvious thoughts about this topic, Luca, are actually. I mean, there's always a gulf between the promise of technology and its delivery, and I think we're seeing that. I mean, if you look at the Gartner hype cycle, I think we're seeing certain elements of AI going into what they call the trough of disillusionment, where people are actually working. Well, where are the use cases? Where are actually the use
Yeah.
cases that are impacting and changing and doing things with it? I mean, it's definitely coming. Of course, it's coming. And I think part of going back to what a CTO does at any level, part of the job is knowing about new technologies and how they're going to be used. So, and I think you look at it from two perspectives, and this is what I see in the community. Can it take us to the next level? And does it present a threat
Mm-mm.
to our current business model?
Yeah.
Now, if you're a freelance writer, I had a friend of mine who was a freelance writer in France until 18 months ago. It has totally decimated your career, right? But I'll give you a quick example of where, from a CTO, from a senior leadership perspective, it can look very threatening if you can then adapt to it. There's a company in America called Chegg, Chegg. Now their business model was they helped students with homework. Basically, it was a crammer, a tech company that helped
Hmm.
students cram before an exam, and they were very successful. ChatGPT arrived, and within 6 months, I think their share price had gone down 64%. And it was
Wow.
such a threat to them that the CEO actually publicly declared that their business model was obsolete. And when I read that, because we're in the ed tech space, I thought, God, they're going out of business. They're done. But actually, what they've done is they've adapted quite quickly to it. So the first thing they did was they tested market sentiment. So they went out and they did a survey, and they found that actually, rather than thinking it was a terrible threat, the majority of their customers were actually saying that they still wanted the involvement of humans, human expertise in that process. So that's the first thing. That's reassuring, right? AI is definitely a threat, but it's reassuring that actually the human in the loop is still pretty important. But the second thing they did was they actually used AI. They've brought AI into the business. So how can we leverage the AI, the new technology? And they've essentially partnered with an AI company to create enhanced learning experiences. And the e-learning industry in general is having to adapt very, very quickly because the expectations from the market are you should be embedding AI into everything that you do. So that's just a quick example where they've actually gone out and built domain-specific LLMs for what they do. So a great example
Yeah.
where I can imagine the CTO on the morning after ChatGPT was launched at that company going, what am I going to do now? But actually, if you just take a step back and you say, actually, it's going to take a while before this takes over everybody's job. And in the meantime, can we do
Yeah.
something with it? And I think Chegg is a great case study. If anybody wants to have a look at it, and then their share price, I think, has returned to where it was. But they've certainly managed to deal with that initial threat in the way that I've explained. But in terms of what yes, I mean we've got our own chatbot. We've got Chat CTO. We are using AI to enable people, or beginning to add it to the product, to enable people who alumni who've left the course to very quickly go back in and retrieve material from the course in an instant. So there are different things that we are trying to adapt with it for sure here, and I think everybody's the same. I'm sure your audience are far more knowledgeable about its potential than I am, but I think the key is to not get too alarmed. I tell you one quick
Yeah.
example. Sorry, Luca, and I'll draw for breath. One quick example of what came up, and again, your audience, I think, will probably understand this. One of the one of the live sessions, one of the CTOs raised AI, and kind of everybody kind of went, "Oh no, not another AI discussion." But he basically said he was wanted to talk about the pressure that he was under from his CEO
Mm.
to come up with an AI strategy. And certainly in the middle of last year, in the white heat of that whole ChatGPT explosion, there was suddenly this demand from the C-suite, from the CEO in particular. We've got to come up with something that's an AI strategy. And a lot of the CTOs were saying, well, there's no use case for it. I cannot justify. There's nothing I can do at the moment that's going to satisfy my CEO's desire to have an AI strategy. And so, what was interesting from a psychological perspective, Luca, about the advent of AI was it was actually adding pressure onto the shoulders of tech leaders,
Yeah.
which goes back again to my point. And I'm a massive believer in the community that you've created and we've created. Lean into that community. If you're getting that pressure, if suddenly there's this demand for something, you just cannot justify it or rationalize it. That's when you need to speak to people. Are you going through the same thing? Because that's the way that you can then go back into your environment and say, actually, this is not really what you need.
Yeah, yeah, I love this take. So if I had to summarize, my takeaway from this answer would be: first, address this from a place of curiosity. So lean
Indeed.
into it, try it, and figure out if you can take advantage of it instead of feeling threatened by it, because chances are you can take it to your advantage. And the second is lean into community, peers, learn about what others are doing to ease off some pressure and maybe even to get some ideas.
100%. Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So so you're seeing a demand on your side for CTOs to acquire, I don't know, AI skills, or are CTOs looking to become AI experts as well? I mean, do you think CTOs should?
No, well, again, it depends on where you are. Probably not.
Of
I mean, the
course.
key is always the bigger the company gets, the more you're going to need people who have more expertise than you. And as you become more senior, there's just no way that you can pick up on this stuff. Generative AI, there's no way that you can be all over it. So you need to grasp an understanding of it, and you need to understand where it might help within your tech strategy. but it's for others. It's for others with expertise within the team to bring that into the team. But yeah, again, that's a very, very headline response. I mean, if you're in a small organization, you probably have to be all over it. But it's challenging with everything else. But I think the point you make is right. Don't over worry about it. Take a step back, have a look at it, have a look at how other people are dealing with it. Look for the use cases where it can be applied within your organization, and then if you need to bring in the expertise, if you can rationalize the business case for bringing in the expertise, then that's the next step.
Yeah, yeah, I agree completely. I think it's even a reassuring take for many people who feel concerned about the fact that they should learn and learn everything that goes out. Every feels like every day or every week there's a new thing. So
I mean,
we can keep up.
we were alarmed. We are
Yeah.
essentially a content site. We deliver course material, we deliver articles, etc. And suddenly ChatGPT arrives. You think, hang on a second, our business model could be over in a year's time. But of course, it isn't. It's made us just think about how we can adapt, which goes back to your original question: how can we adapt? How can we bring this into the organization? But actually, our community and our people love the human side of it. They absolutely would not want to lose that. And so, it's like pushing in a question to ChatGPT. I tested ChatGPT on a limerick competition on my podcast, Luca, and it was terrible, absolutely terrible. So, there is still hope for us humans in the world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned that, of course, your concerns and about AI and education, working in education. Of course, I was slightly concerned myself for being a technical writer like your friend. I mean, I think that segues nicely into a question about what does good education for CTOs and leaders look like? Because in my experience, everybody agrees that they should invest in their own professional growth and personal growth, but then we are all busy. We are all not keen into acting on anything until we have a strong pain about something that we need to solve. So do you think that, I don't know, the bulk of professional growth happens, for example, on the job, and then you should save some time to grow on the side through courses, communities? I mean, what does the portfolio, the ideal portfolio for professional growth look like for tech leaders, for CTOs, and even, I don't know, in regular engineers? Maybe it's not that different.
Yes. Well, there's got to be an intrinsic motivation. For example, the
Mm,
journey that people take with CTO Academy is not for everybody. We've launched, we opened this conversation with on the fact that actually tech leadership is about people. It's about communication. It's about empathy. Now, not everybody is not everybody has those skills. Not everybody. We have had a few people who've arrived at CTO Academy, have started the courses, and realize it's not for them. So I think understanding your own values and your own intrinsic motivation is absolutely crucial. Again, we talk a lot on the course about self-leadership, which is about self-awareness, which can often be dealt with a coach sometimes if you need a kind of external perspective. But it's about self-awareness, it's about self-regulation, it's about moderating your reactions and your behaviors, which again, a little bit of the AI discussion there, and it's about self-learning. So, the book on self-leadership, the bestseller is written by a guy called Andrew Bryant, who we know, and he breaks it down into those three categories. So looking at the self-learning, I think actually this is where AI, EdTech, education sector, has really got to step up because particularly with our audience, they're time poor. There is nobody at CTO Academy who has the luxury of time. You might have somebody who's in between jobs and wants to take advantage of it, but most of them will come on to the discovery calls with our team and say, "I've got no time for this. I can't. I have too many demands on my life." So one of the things that AI is definitely going to help with is managing that for you. So for example, things like micro learning. It's
mm,
not about big long lectures. It's not about big tutorials. It's not about capstone projects. It's about micro learning. What can I learn as quickly as possible that's going to have an impact on me tomorrow morning in my job and later on in the career? It's about personalization, highly personalized learning programs and learning plans that are inclusive and engaging and have very clear and they augment those outcomes for people. So people are only going to engage with education if it adopts these new technologies, that it makes it easier for it to slot in alongside people's very, very busy lifestyles. But I would say this, wouldn't I think it is important that people have some kind of professional growth program alongside their busy lifestyle, because Learning on the job is really what drove CTO Academy. That was the basis of Jason's frustration, that he wasn't getting that broader perspective. He wasn't getting a sense of best practice. He wasn't seeing what actually he should be, the frameworks that he should be using for psychological safety, as an example. And I think, therefore, it is important for you to allocate time. It is important for you to think about how you can fit in education alongside learning on the job. Perhaps it's through a coach, perhaps it's through a course, perhaps it's through a community. There are different ways of doing it, which will suit different people for sure. But I think your organization should be backing you, because and
Mm.
again, this is a challenge. Not every CEO sees the benefits of it. But it's an interesting time of the year, Luca, because it's the end of the financial year. So we tend to see quite a surge of interest in the courses, and that's people trying to get their budget out of the door and making sure they have the same for next year. But it's interesting when we have the discussions with them about the motivation for doing it. That some of it's financial, but some of it is the CEO has recognised that there is needed to be training. So you know you need to get that backing and that support. But as far as I'm concerned, you should always have some kind of professional growth program that suits you, your lifestyle, and your availability of time.
Yeah, yeah. I took so many notes while you were speaking because there are so many interesting things. Of course, this is one of the topics that interests me the most. One question I have, and then we'll also pick up a question from the chat, is about micro learning. So I think that's a very interesting definition, and I'd love to dig a little bit more about how you think about it, whether it is something that you think it's enabled by technology, by AI that can know you better and you can understand what you need to do and teach you something about your needs, or are you doing any experiments about it? I mean, what are your thoughts about how to do this kind of micro learning?
Well, fundamentally, our course is based on micro learning. So we have our lectures are 15 to 20 minutes. They are we say to the lecturers, we'll get quite senior people, how to be effective at executive level. Just take one quick example. We had a CEO come in to do that, and when we told him it was a 15-minute lecture, he said, "It's impossible. There's no way I can cram 15 minutes of learning it, all of the things that I want to talk about into 15 minutes." But actually, when you told him distill what's crucial, distill what's really super important into that 15 minutes, then he managed to do it. And the lecture is a really, really good one. And our model is based on micro lectures, and then there's tons of additional material if you want to take a deeper dive. So just in a practical, deliverable sense, that's how we deal with micro lectures and micro learning. But certainly in terms of AI, yes, the personalization, we're beginning to build a product which analyzes learner data. It analyzes behavior of people using the course. It picks up on how much time they've got available, what their capacities are, and all of that kind of stuff. So I think the ed tech space will definitely in the next 12 to 18 months have that hyper personalization that is about, actually, this
Mm.
person only has 2 hours a week. This person is going to learn, he's going to walk the dog. We have someone who watches the lecture every morning and walking the dog. How can we shape these lectures to make sure that they fit that lifestyle and what the outcomes are
Yeah.
that they want? So I think the ed tech space is moving in the direction that will help people who don't have at the moment that sense of time, that sense of capacity to do any more learning, into making it highly personalized. And that's what I think the micro learning space will move into.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a very interesting space to watch, and it's one of the examples where technology goes from being a threat for a space to becoming an opportunity
Yes,
to do things 10 times better.
I think so. I mean, one of the things that we those they call them MOOCs. I don't know whether that's a phrase that's well known outside the ed tech, but those very big Coursera is an example, or Udemy is an example. The challenge for them is that it needs to fit into a lifestyle for people now, and it needs to be highly tailored and highly personalized. And I think that's where we have a slight advantage, because we are very niche and we're very, very focused. But people just haven't got the capacity to. One of there were two major challenges with e-learning. If I can just finish off with this, Luca, and I know you're itching to move on, but two great challenges for
Sure.
e-learning that I'm sure people in the watching will have experienced. The first is the drop-offs. People will. I've done it. I've signed up to Udemy courses and just never finished them. They haven't been engaging enough. I've had too much else to do. That's the first big challenge for e-learning. We tend not to have that so much because the people who join are highly motivated, so they tend to want to finish the course. The second problem, and there's a big one, is retention. There's lots of research out
Mm.
there that says, you can watch a course, you can really enjoy a course, but 6 months later, how much of it has actually been cemented in? So again,
Yeah.
technology and the way that a course is delivered, repetition is part of the way we program it to try and just aid that retention. So until EdTech, the e-learning community has solved those problems, it does become more of a challenge for people to maximize their value they get out of the time of these courses.
Yeah, I agree. Great take. So we have a couple of questions from the chat, from the community, from Matei. One is about it's funny anti-micro learning. So if you have any book recommendation instead, so something long form, if for I guess for technical leaders or even for leaders in general, knowing that you come from a non-techie background, if there is something that was really important for you.
Yeah, is this a question specifically about the CTO journey or more generally about
I
growth?
think, yeah, I think for CTOs, for
Yeah, yeah.
CTOs. But if you have also more general recommendations, happy to hear myself.
Well, yeah, okay, all right. Well, I'll answer two ways. Then there are definitely CTO books out there. I think there's a startup CTO handbook which has some great reviews, and I think there's something called the CTO or the CIO Bible, which
Mm,
again, and also there are so many blogs out there. I mean, Camille Fournier is someone that I've come across recently.
yeah,
Actually, great blog, very personal. So yeah, for sure. I mean, there is tons of stuff out there, but that, in a strange way, that's part of the problem, Luca. I think there's just so much out there. There's so much noise. Yeah, refactoring, dare I say. So there are lots and lots of tomes and pieces of content that you can read. But certainly, in terms of the CTO role, those two would probably be the ones I would recommend. I can't remember the authors of them, but you'll find them.
there's the manager's path by
Manager's
Camille
Path.
Fournier.
Yeah,
If you were meaning that, yeah,
indeed. So yeah, there are loads of books out there, and of course, it's courses and coaching and community are not going to suit everybody. So
yeah,
absolutely. And if anybody, by the way, if anybody, we have got a list. I think I know you've got a book club as well. I think we've got about 60 or 70 books. If
yeah.
anybody does want any recommendations from me, then please get in touch. I'll be happy to send them.
Yes, and we'll put links in the newsletter and the podcast episode as well.
Great.
And then the second question is: do you have specific recommendations for CTOs on full remote teams where because you mentioned community, right? The importance of community, where but CTOs where the closest community is like hours away, is not very close. I mean, that matters for myself as well
Mm,
because in Rome
mm.
we don't have such a big community. So I'm eager to hear.
So I'm so sorry, Luke. I didn't quite get the question. So any recommendations of how
Yeah,
to
yeah.
build a community or?
No, and any specific recommendation for CTOs on full remote teams where the first, the closest physical community is hours away,
Mm,
you don't
mm,
have it near.
mm. Any particular recommendations? Gosh, I mean, I'm fully remote, but I'm very comfortable with being fully remote. So some people are and some people aren't. I don't know if I have a specific answer to that, really, Luca. I mean, we try and host a number of events that are more relaxed and more
Yeah,
social. So I suppose it's finding your tribe, isn't it? It's finding
yeah,
refactoring is one of them. We're another. It's finding a tribe that fits and suits you. We have a Friday drop-in as an example, which is the topic is dictated by the community. So someone will volunteer. There's a case study I think tomorrow that they're all going through. So they meet on a Friday,
yeah,
but it's much more relaxed because it's Friday afternoon. So I
yeah.
don't have any specific answer to that, other than finding the right tribe for you, because there are lots out there.
But I think that something in the style of what you said is the right direction. It's what I think because this is a topic, by the way. Thank you, Matej, for asking this. That I'm thinking all the time when I'm thinking about the refactoring community, where to go, what to build, and I think that live events where people can get to know each other, even if through a webcam, of
Mm.
course, not in person, where you share your challenges, you share even what's going on in your mind, can go a long way. So we are starting doing some mastermind sessions where people share problems at work, get advice from each other, and then there are different formats. I think that also ties in with what you said before, that different people like to learn in different things, like to connect in different ways. So somebody might be more into just reading newsletters, laid back. Somebody might be more into joining live meetings with other people. So I think the key is figuring out what's out there and understanding what works for you in terms of creating a
Yeah, I
connection.
mean, we 100% of course, and we've always been remote first. We launched just before the pandemic, but the pandemic forced obviously everybody to be remote. We do have in-person sessions. We have sessions that we've had them in London, Cape Town, Sao Paulo, in different areas where we've got clusters, and they
Yeah.
are so powerful. I mean, it is fantastic
Yeah.
to sit down. We had one in London we had a curry night in London last week where we met 14 of our MBA students, and gosh, it was great. It was just great to speak to people. So very, very powerful if you can reach out and get to these kind of events for sure. But otherwise, it has to be remote, and finding that tribe is right. By the way, I love Matteo's comment, anti-micro learning. I've written that down, anti-micro learning. I'm gonna think about that, dwell on that.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I love that. And so I have another question myself because you mentioned that sometimes it's hard for CTOs and I guess tech leaders in general to advocate for expensing their own learning, be it through coaching, be it through courses. Do you have any advice on that? In helping these people advocating for the fact that this stuff is really valuable. What you're seeing in your community from people who are successfully uh, making this part of their company's budgets?
Yeah, great question. And I think the key, and again, it all depends. It's all dependent on what the points of
Of
resistance
course.
are from those that are around you and above you. But I mean, I think the argument has got to be that my professional growth will impact positively on the company. My ability to understand what digital trends are, what people, what is hype and what is reality, can actually add. Every organization, every CEO is looking for a strategic competitive advantage. That's what they're looking for. And from our experience, most of them are frustrated with their tech leaders. But that's part of the reason why we've
Mhm.
grown is a lot of the people that come to us are actually recommended by their L&D team or by the CEO because they feel there's a need to upskill them to make them more give them that hybrid skill set. So there is generally, from our experience, an understanding and appreciation that there is a need to upskill within the senior leadership
Mm.
team. But I think it all comes down to business value. Can you add something? Can you, growing as a tech leader, joining a course in a community, can you argue for the fact that actually the benefits are going to spill into the organization? Whether it's bringing best practice back in, whether it's understanding more about the external market changes that are going on, whether just you building your own confidence and your own ability to lead teams is going to impact directly on the CEO's bottom line. I think it's that. I think it's making sure that you can argue the benefits both for the business and for yourself, which generally tends to help with those that we work with.
Yeah. Do you feel that in your experience this is still kind of rare? I mean, it doesn't happen as often as it should, and probably this goes back to what you said at the beginning that technology in many companies is seen still as a cost center
Yeah.
as opposed as to a strategic area of the company.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's madness, Luca. I mean, we price our again, going back to a point I made earlier, we created our course as an alternative to the big ticket ones, the Wharton programs, which, as you know, are $25,000, $30,000. So we priced ours specifically to make them almost a no-brainer. They're accessible,
Yeah.
they're affordable, and for most companies, they're a drop in the ocean. So it's bonkers. We have had people come back to us and said the CEO just won't back it. The CEO. Now that to me is a massive challenge for the individual telling us that, because that means they're not backing you. And if you're not in an
Mm.
organization that's prepared to back you, that's to back your growth, and is not investing in the people and that are around, that's a concern. Now, it's not a great market at the moment to go and find a new job, but I would certainly question how they're valuing your role and your future role within the organization if they're not prepared to support you and back you. But ultimately, as you say, CEOs can be quite blind sometimes to the fact that it has been traditionally a cost center, and it's still viewed that way. So it can be a challenge, but I would certainly question pushback on that as to what that means for you, for your future career within that organization, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's not just a problem of money. I mean, if I had, to go to the other side of the problem and give advice to CEOs, I mean, it's not just about paying for, expensing courses. It's about creating space, for learning on the job. Because I've seen this firsthand many times from people buying the subscription for refactoring, for example, or in the community, that the problem is not that they can't afford or that the company wouldn't expense that. I mean, there are many cases where the company would expense that, but then they know they just wouldn't have the time to go through to spend on their personal education and professional growth because that would never become like a first-class citizen among their activities. So it's not even just about the money, in my experience.
You're
I
right.
don't know if that
No, you're completely right.
matches yours.
And again, it comes down to the culture that's operating around you. If it's micromanaging, if it's it's all about time you're putting in rather than the growth that you're able to achieve. Then yes, there is a cultural issue for you there to deal with, as well as a cost issue for sure. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, Andrew, thank you so much for this great chat. I loved speaking with you again, and the next time, I promise, the next time you come to Rome, I will bring you to the best pizzeria in town, which is one of the best in the world. I know I have the name already. I have everything
You're
set,
right.
so you should always only come to Rome, and everything is ready for you.
Yeah. Well, I'll be circulating photographs of that dinner to members of the refactoring community when it happens.
Yeah. Yes, to redeem my
Yeah.
reputation. Yes. So thank you again, Andrew, and talk soon
Good.
again.
Thanks, Luca. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this chat valuable, you can subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find the show. You can find all past episodes and learn more about the show at refactoring.fm. See you in the next episode.